My subject today is the God contest. The God contest. I want to define God for you. You don't have to accept it. But for this presentation, this is what I'd like you to consider when you think of God. A person or thing that is worshipped or reverenced. A person or thing that is worshipped or reverenced. That's probably pretty close to the definition even. There's a difference between the word contest and the word protest. As the difference is pros and cons, right? Simply for or against. Strong objection to or contending for. So what we'll be looking at is who in your life really is contending for your worship. Reasonable? It might be surprising, but I just want you to know this is my thrust. Are there competitions taking place in your life, really? Are there things in your life that are thriving for the position of supremacy? Is that a possibility? That's what I want you to think about. In fact, I was reading an article a couple of weeks back, and it's very startling. In fact, I think I just want to share a couple of excerpts from this this article with you, and then I'll share a few things from the scriptures, and then we can tie a couple of ends together, and that should be it for this presentation. The article's title is "The End of Religion, Technology and the Future." It's interesting. In fact, what gripped my attention was this phrase that says, "Old gods are dead, and one day yours will be too." And I found that interesting. So anyway, I started reading the article, and as I said, I'm just going to share a couple of excerpts here. History is littered with dead gods. The Greek and Roman gods and thousands of others have perished. And yet, Allah, Yahweh, Krishna, and a few more seem to survive. But will belief in gods endure, is the question. It will not. Our descendants will be too far advanced to share such primitive beliefs. If we survive and science progresses, we will manipulate the genome. We will rearrange the atom. We will augment the mind. If science defeats suffering and death, religion as we know it will die. Without suffering and death, religion will have lost its reason for existence. For who will pray for heavenly cures when the cures already exist on earth? Who will die hoping for reprieve from the gods when science offers immortality? With the defeat of death, science and technology will have finally triumphed over superstition. Our descendants will know once and for all that they are stronger than imaginary gods. The author of this article has his PhD in science, and so he's basically just telling you what he sees happening. In fact, here's something he says. He says, today, the gods are impotent. Is he lying? He says, tomorrow, they are irrelevant. So I want you to think about what he's saying, because he's really talking about his environment and what he sees. He's talking about even Christians and how and what they claim to believe and who they claim to believe in, and yet there's really no evidence or demonstration that such a God exists. That's the point he's making, I think. He says a lot. Let me see if I can narrow this down to one final statement. It's just too much. I don't know if we can make a better future. Interesting. I mean, if you listen to the strong arguments he had at the beginning, it's amazing he ends with this. I don't know if we can make a better future, but I know that no help from the God, I know that no help will come from the gods. Turning our backs on them now is our first step on our journey. All right. So he's trying to show really that based on technology today and science and the development of science and what you're doing, he says there'll be no place for religion in the future. And you know what they've been doing. You know what they've been doing with stem cell research. You know what they've been doing with all these advances, as they claim, in science, and how that they are actually trying to create life. And you know they're gone a lot into robotics. Ken, he's not here right now, but it tells me that the machines you sell are all dealing with nanotechnology. It's all robotics that does all this machine work, you know. And so this is the thrust. The thrust of science and all of this is really to create life. I mean, you see what they're doing with robots and so on, drones, and I mean, I saw and probably have a clip of Obama meeting world's most famous robot, Osimo. Even having a conversation with him and playing football with him. And he's the best so far that they have managed to make, this robot called Osimo. Anyway, so this is where we are. We're in this place of the push for reality outside of God. In other words, creating your own God, creating an environment where God you don't need God as we know it. You create your own. All right. Now, I want you to consider then something that more affects us, because not many of us, John, not many of us are into research and knows what's really happening around us. Not many people are into that. So let's see if we can come down to things that we are involved in, things that we are familiar with and are around us, that maybe you might be surprised how much of control this has on your life. I want us to discuss a little bit about money. Money. It's interesting. I want us to look at a passage here in 1 Timothy chapter 6. Money. Paul was here saying a couple of things. If we start in verse 6. 1 Timothy chapter 6 and verse 6. But godliness with contentment is great gain. For we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and raiment, let us therewith be content. But they that will be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and hurtful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. Why? For the love of money is what? The root of all evil, which while some coveted after, they have erred from the faith and pierced themselves through with many sorrows. So I want you to think about the effect that money has on your life. That's interesting. Do you realize that most people today can't live without money? Maybe we're all in that category. Can you actually live without money? It's interesting. I was having a conversation with my brother about 2 weeks ago. He lives down there in Florida. And I asked him the question. I said, what if something happens that seizes all the money you own? He said, in his Jamaican slang, "Youth, I never thought of that." He said, I have not thought about that before. That's interesting. But Money drives people. Money motivates. I mean, I once was we're talking to my church back home there, and we were talking about a truck driver. We were going to go out and so on, and then people were saying, "Well, I won't be able to make it this time or so." And I said, "It's interesting because what if we were paying? What if we started paying the members of the church to go and hand out literature? And let's say, we're paying $1 per literature, man. Everybody, I think we'll have some resignations. People will resign their jobs just to go out and give out literature. You probably could make quite a bit, just handing out literature for money, right? So I'm just simply saying, sometimes our motivation, the motivation we get from earning money, when compared to other things, we have to begin to wonder, how do we view this? What is the effect that money has on our mind? Is it that money is the God of many people? Is that possible? All right. Is it that money is actually our God? See? We like to think about others, but we never come home to discuss this to ourselves and ask ourselves and be honest with ourselves whether or not this is really a fact. Now, I want you to look at another passage with me. And I want you to consider the question, who created money? And as you think about who created money, what was the reason that money was created? Why was money created? Matthew 22 is the passage I'd like for you to go to. Matthew chapter 22. And a couple of verses here. It's interesting that it's almost impossible for you to think about a time that ever existed when money was not. Interesting. Was there such a time that there was no money? Nobody even heard the term? But I'm going to read for you, starting in verse 15 in Matthew chapter 22. Did I say Matthew 22? Yes, okay. Then went the Pharisees and took counsel how they might entangle him in his talk. And they sent out unto him disciples with the Herodians, saying, Master, we know that thou art true, and teachest the way of God in truth, neither carest thou for any man, for thou regardest not the person of men. Man, what an honor. We know this. And, they're really lifting him up here. Tell us, therefore, what thinkest thou? Is it lawful to give tribute unto Caesar or not? But Jesus perceived their wickedness and said, Why tempt ye me, ye hypocrites? Show me a tribute money. And they brought unto him a penny. And he said unto them, Whose is this image and superscription? And they say unto him, Caesar's. Then said he unto them, Render therefore unto Caesar what? The things which are Caesar's, and unto God the things that are God. So notice then, money is the creation of the government. Did you know that? I was just looking in that glass case at the back, and just like our money, I was just looking at some old money on display, and I think the one in there says the Japanese government. I just asked David if he had a U.S. note, any note. He showed me one that says the United States of America. In fact, wherever you go and you look at the money, it actually has the name of the country, right? So money really is the creation of your government. And by this method, you're controlled. Your government is able to control you. And so we have reached a place where most people actually think that they can't live without money. It is the same kind of control that will bring in the mark of the beast. I was very curious as I heard Denmark considering going cashless, but now they're gone, right? Now they're gone completely cashless. You might not have thought of this before, but just stop for a moment and think. Your government has actually stipulated that you can't spend or draw a certain amount of your own money, or what you think is yours, more than a certain amount. In fact, in my country, they passed a law that if you spend more than $1 million, no, that's not a lot of money. It's like 10,000 US, right? So don't let the figure sound big. They said if we spend in cash more than $1 million, it's a criminal offense, and you can be locked up. Now, this is not stolen money necessarily. It's your own money. David told me he went to the bank the other day to draw some money. And the lady said to him, excuse me, sir, what are you going to do with this money? And he said, what? He says, this is my money. And she says, it's a stipulation of the government. It's for security reasons, right? Now you can attach whatever reason there are you want to attach it. It's fine, right? But I'm just simply trying to say something. I'm just saying, and this is not just in your country or my country. All around the world, there are now stipulations being set in place where you cannot spend more than a certain amount at a time, or even withdraw a certain amount at a time, right? All right, so I want you to think. Revelation talks about the mark of the beast coming in, right? And it talks about you not being able to buy or sell except, okay? I know a lot of people that has their focus, their binoculars and everything fixed on the mark of the beast. But what's interesting, the word actually says, you shall not be able to buy or sell, save he that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Go look at it. It's verse 17, Revelation 13:17. It actually says three things. We are focused and fixed on one. It says three. In other words, there is something that will be brought in place. And I think a cashless society is just as good as anything else that could bring in such a system. Because see, when you have money, you have power. You can do as you please, how you please, when you please, right? But when your money goes through a certain system, we can stop it. So just remember, who created money really? Who created money? There are people in this world that controls money. In my country, it's not my government that determines the value of our money. No, there is another system out there in the world that tells you what our money values. You know what? Every day, our money either gains or loses. Devaluation. So it tells you that there are systems in place that exist that really controls you, and you're thinking, I'm in control. We will be up for a really big surprise one day. One morning we'll just wake up to something different, because I think what happened in Denmark was the same thing. See, overnight things happen. You don't even get some warning to say, okay, you know what? I think we'll be doing this by this date, so let's all prepare for this. You just wake up and it's different. You don't even know. Somebody says, did you hear the news? And say, what news? This is what we'll be doing as of today. Wow, I didn't know that. Anyway, let's go on. So, what Jesus is saying here, according to Jesus, and you just read it, and if you think I'm saying something different than what he said, then tell me. He says there are two great systems in this world. One is the money creators and God. Jesus says, do not intermingle them. Jesus says, give unto the money creators their due, give unto God his due. Then from that you can understand certain things. The system, this mark of the beast system that will come in will actually be giving to God, taking from God, and giving to the money creators what belongs to God. It's actually going to be a twist of the system. And you can understand why. It's taking allegiance from him to something else or someone else. Is that making sense? All right, so he makes it clear. He says, this is really what we ought to be doing. In this day and age, this is what we ought to be doing, okay? All right. Now, it'd be good to ask yourself, and just being honest, and think, if your money should be locked down in a system that causes you, and I don't want you to, look, 2 weeks ago, they said the richest man in China, this was big news, the richest man in China lost his wealth in 1 second. Are you aware of that? The richest man in China, his wealth was 30 billion. You can check this on the news. $30 billion. And on the stock market, in 1 second, he lost 14 billion. So sometimes we're thinking, I'm pretty good. I have a little money stashed away, and you're not even aware of what's really happening and who controls what and so on, right? So you just be careful, because these are things that are real. Sometimes we don't stop to think about them, but they are real, right? How do you survive if you don't have what it takes to survive? How do you survive? That's a good point, right? But we are in the day and age that it is necessary to stop and ask yourself, what would you do? In Romans chapter 12, it discusses something that I want to subtitle mind control. See, a lot of us, we don't think about mind control. That he who controls your mind controls your life. If I can control the way you think, I can always be ahead of what you'll do. If I can control the way you think, I make you think a certain way because I want a certain desired effect from the way you think. And because of the way you think, this is the way you're going to act. Psychologists and you have some magicians who says they're not really magicians, they are mentalists. They say they've actually just studied the human mind and have just found out that there's a way to get you to do what they want you to do. It's really by controlling your mind. Did I say Romans chapter 12? Did I say that? Yes, so let's read what it says in verses 1 and 2. These are just familiar passages that we're just looking at, and sometimes it's just interesting that there are things there that you have probably never thought about, yet it's really there. Because I'm not trying to do something new, I'm just trying to say it's there, but we have just never looked at it that way. All right, verse 1 says what? I beseech you therefore together. Let's go together. I beseech you therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you do what? Present your bodies a living sacrifice. I'll come back to that. What kind of sacrifice now? It must be what? Holy, acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. And verse 2 now says what? And be not what? Conformed to this world, but be ye what? Transformed how? By the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that what? Good and acceptable and perfect will of God. Now I want you to think about this, because why it's necessary to think about it is because most people are not able to prove what God's will is for us. Honestly. Most of us do. We are not able to prove what is God's good, acceptable, and perfect will for us. We're not able to do it. Why? The reason is because of where our mind is. It's because of who controls the mind, because of the way we think. Now I want you to think, because this is tied together. He says we should offer to God our bodies as living sacrifices. What is a sacrifice? All right, giving up. All right, giving up something that's of value. Isn't that true? Giving up something that's of value. So let's think about the sacrifices back in the Old Testament. You do something, and it has to be something of value that you have to give, because it costs you, right? Now when you give it up to be killed, right? Now here Paul says we are to give our bodies as a living sacrifice. In other words, even if it's killed, you have made that decision, right? Even if the body is killed, you have made that decision, right? So it is the giving up of myself to him. Here I am. Use me for your glory. Use me for your purpose. Is that a sacrifice? All right. Well, if we can carry through with what that really means, that is a sacrifice. Now, it's tied to the way we think. Now, it says, Don't be conformed. So all of this is in relation to giving up your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable unto God. Holy, meaning what? Set apart, sanctified. And acceptable unto God, which is your reasonable service. Now, the way you do this is first checking your mind out in the way you think. Now, here's what he says. If you're conformed to this world, you can't be a living sacrifice. Do you think I'm misreading what he says? If you're conformed to this world, your body can't be a living sacrifice. If you're conformed to this world, you can't be holy. If you're conformed to this world, you're not acceptable unto God. If you're conformed to this world. That is why in James he says, he that is the friend of the world is what? The enemy of God. The Bible actually says this. So are there principles of the world reigning in the way you think, reigning in your mind, that is holding you back from being the sacrifice you ought to be? Are these questions making sense? To me, they are. So he says, there has to be, John, an examination as to how we live on a day-to-day basis, an examination as to how we relate to the world in all spheres of life. And he says, when you do this examination, the question then is, are you in any way conforming to the world, conforming to the principles of the world? Are you in any way conforming to this? And he says, if that is so, you can't be a living sacrifice. You can't be holy and acceptable unto him. But he says, if you can see where you're conforming, then you need to be able now to see how I can change that conformity. And the only way you can change that conformity is actually by being transformed. See, we said the theme of the camp is what? Okay, I thought you didn't know. In his image. See, I can't be in his image. I can't put myself in his image. I can't behave like I'm in his image. I have to be transformed. I can't transform myself. That has to be a power that does this, that is outside of me and greater than me, right? So the transformation really is something that God does. The decision is really something I make, and I say, this is what I want you to do, Father. And then he can transform me. He can make me a son. And if I'm a son, I'm in his image. And I don't become a son by trying to live like a son or pretend to be a son or try to act like a son. I become a son by receiving the Father's life. Without the Father's life, I don't belong to the Father. When I have the Father's life, I am his. His seed is in me. I behave like him because of life. So there has to be a transformation in the way we think. And this transformation causes a renewing of the mind. And this renewing of the mind brings us into subjection to this reality of his perfect will. So I want you to think then for a moment. Because most of us are not even aware as to what we're dealing with, honestly. We're not even aware as to what we're dealing with. We're in the world and should not even be a part of the world, but I don't know how that can be because, we're in the world, right? And we're actually a part of the world, right? Ephesians chapter 6 and verse 12. In fact, 2 verses before, and this is interesting because I was thinking about this. Shotzi told me this is what the children will be dealing with this weekend, or this week here, is the whole armor of God. And here Paul was telling us that we are to put on the whole armor of God that we'll be able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And in fact, what I want you to focus on is verse 12 of the same chapter. Sometimes we quote verses because we can memorize them, but we don't even stop and think about what we're saying. But I want you to look at verse 12 with me and see if we can just break down what we're reading. Notice what he says in verse 12. For, and this for is really in reference to what he said. We ought to put on the whole armor of God that we'll be able to stand against all this the wiles of the devil, the tricks of the devil, the attacks of the devil, and the cunning devices of the devil. Right? He says, for, verse 12, for together now, for we wrestle not against what, beloved? Flesh and blood. Stop for a moment and think. What does that mean? We wrestle not against flesh and blood. What's he saying? All right, so our enemies are not necessarily people. But against principalities, who is that? Against powers, who is that? Against the rulers of the darkness of this world, who are they? Against spiritual wickedness in high places. So I want you to think, because is this just a verse, or is this reality? Could it be that these principalities and powers and the rulers of the darkness of this world and these spiritual wickedness in high places are all wrapped up and tangled up in our lives and we're not even aware? Could it be? So he says, this is really where we are. See, our warfare is really not with the government, right? Our warfare is with a spiritual force that is at work in the world. Now, tomorrow, hopefully, I'll be able to delve into that a little bit more. But I just want you to think for a moment that the spiritual forces are there to get your mind. The spiritual forces are there to keep your attention from the reality of your spiritual strength. I'll say this and I'll say it again and again and a couple of times more if possible. But we are not physical beings. We are spiritual beings living in a physical body. That's spiritualism, brother. Maybe. But that's what I am. A spirit. As Paul says, this is the house in which I live. You can read it in 2 Corinthians 5. He says, this is the house in which I live, and in this I groan and do all of this, right? And he talks about another house that was going to be made. A different one. And he talks, and he says that all along. You probably didn't pick it up, but he says, oh, this mortal will change to immortality, and this corrupt will put. You know it. That's what he said. So but it's me that lives in here. The reality is that this is where we are. We don't focus on who we are and the spiritual beings that we are. We focus on the physical things. And we think physical things is what makes us up. It's not true. So we dress it up, and in the mirror, and we, when the spiritual man is not looked after, when the real you is not dealt with, when your mind can run in various directions without control, when you can look at others and think evil thoughts, and you say, oh, I'm a son of God. When inside of you is really what really needs reconstruction. And that is why nothing physical outside can help you except God, His Spirit, coming inside and making you transformed. How? By the new birth. See, we're dealing with the reality of this God contest and who really is getting worshipped, who really is getting your attention, who really, and I'm just saying, just think about the things that are wrapped up in your life, the things that you're thinking that are good. Maybe it's the television, maybe it's your iPad, maybe it's some gadget, maybe it's something, and we're thinking that these are necessary. Are they really, or are they really more for your destruction? I would just stop for a moment and think, what are the things that really takes most of your attention most of the time? Honestly. Where do you spend most of your time? Just be honest with yourselves. Don't tell anybody, but you know. That's a good assessment. Then you come to worship and you fall asleep and you say, it's kind of humid and this week was really challenging, and so I'm a little tired. And yes, we do understand. I know you work very hard and all of this. And Well, what's the benefit? I mean, in the long run, that's what we're getting down to, the long run. In the long run, will you look back and says, if I had it to again, I would change things? Don't wait until that time. Stop now and think. Change things now when you can make decisions. That's what I mean. You can make decisions for him or against him. You can make decisions now. Who will rule, me or him? You can make decisions now. Who will live, me or him? You can make that decision now. Don't wait until that time and, oh, I wish I could do it again. No, because it never comes back. But we can do it now. All right, so I'm just saying, are the things in our home, is it possible that your family, is it possible? Come on now. Is it possible that your own family, your wife, your children, is it possible that the things you own really has more of your attention and your affection than God has? Now, you can't force this, don't you know? David's father would always tell us of seeing a man beating his wife. And with every blow he gave her, he said, "You are to love me. Why don't you love me? I told you to love me." Do you get love that way? So it's not even saying, I think I'm going to love you. That's not how relationships are built. Relationships are built by association. Relationships are built by spending time together. Relationships are built by looking in the face of each other. That's how relationships are built. Because, even sometimes, husbands, you know that. Wives, sometimes we get so busy that even the wife or husband at home gets, taken for granted. Because we are just this busy. As she'll understand, I'm doing this for her anyway. Interesting. All right. Now, let's go down to another passage. Let me just check my time. Let's go down to another passage. This is 2 Corinthians now. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. 2 Corinthians chapter 10. A couple of verses here. Paul says, in verse 3, he says, "For though we walk in the flesh." I see this coming up over and over again. The flesh versus the spirit. Dealing with our physical needs versus our spiritual needs. For though we walk in the flesh, what does he say next? We do not war after the flesh. Have you thought of that before? He said the same thing to Nicodemus. I think it's verse 6. John 3:6, he says, "For they that are of the flesh is flesh." Have you read that? He said it also in Romans 8:5. "And they that are after the Spirit is spirit." Those who are born of the flesh is flesh. Those who are born of the Spirit is spirit. That's what he says. He says, those who are of the flesh do mind the things of the flesh. So stop for a moment and see what things you're minding. See what things you're concerned about. See what things you're always, that has to be right. Are they fleshly things or really the spiritual things? I'm just saying the verses have always said the same things. Verse 4. "For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal." What is he saying? All right, so we need weapons, right? He says we're in a warfare. He just said that. He says, although you're living in the flesh, he says, listen, your fight is not in the flesh. And then he says we have weapons, but he says the weapons of our warfare are not carnal weapons. They are not fleshly weapons. They're not physical weapons. They're not actually guns. He says they are mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. All right, so he's saying that in the warfare, some strongholds are being pulled down, right? Look what it says in verse 5. It says, the weapons of our warfare will be able to do this, deal with these things. Casting down imaginations. What is that? Imaginations? Stop for a moment. You recognize that all of us do that? We imagine things. But honestly, what is it that goes through your imagination? Just be honest. What is it that you think about most of the time? Just ask yourself. I mean, that's private, that's personal, of course. That's why only you can tell. He says the weapons that we have will be able to cast down imaginations. What else will it do? And every high thing that do what now? Exalted itself against the knowledge of God, and bring it into captivity every what? Thought to the obedience of Christ. How we learned this back when we were growing up. Sow a thought, reap a deed. You read that? You seen that before? Sow a thought, reap a deed. Why? Because you become what you think about most of the time. Sow a deed, reap a habit. Sow a habit, reap a destiny. It's just a reality. It begins with the way you think. It begins because thought changes. You know, I think I'm going to change my approach to life. I think I'm just sitting down in church, just listening to these Christian people. I think I need to take my life in hand, and I need to go out and get a job and start working like a man, and so on, right? So you make up your mind. And you say, you know, it says in Daniel 1 verse 8, it says how that Daniel purposed in his heart that he will not defile himself with the king's meat. You know, that's what it says. It's the imaginations of the heart, the things that you think about. It says, the weapons of our warfare are mighty through God to pull down these things. So they're spiritual warfare, and the weapons that we receive from Him are spiritual weapons, because it begins to deal with the imagination, the things we think about, and bring our thoughts into obedience with Christ. That's the point. It's interesting because I'm thinking how, you know, the other day I was just looking at the biggest machine that has ever been made by humans, the biggest machine that has ever been made in the history of the universe, is a machine built down there at the border of France and Switzerland, 17 miles long. And I realized I've been talking to a couple of people and nobody has ever, this CERN, right? This collider, right? And you're saying, what? What is that? We've never heard of that. Okay. All right. Now, when you think, I thought it was a lot more lively. When you think about what science is doing in trying to find this God particle, in trying to find the reason for this Big Bang or to reproduce it, and what is happening otherwise, it's amazing. But I won't take you too much into science and into any of this, since I already have you on a path that I want you to stay. And that path is really where we are at this day and age, right now, in this room, where we are. The uncertainty of the future, and yet the certainty of the future. See, it's almost paradoxical. But when you think about it, there is a future that is certain. There is a future that, listen, when you bask into this reality, you are safe. There is no worry. There's nothing that ruffles your feathers when you're there. And there's another reality that is, man, I don't know. I really don't know what tomorrow will bring. Let's pray. Let's hope it will be something good, right? So there are two futures from this day, from this room on. Two futures. Just remember, two futures. One is the future for the physical, and the other is the future for the spiritual, right? In fact, they're both spiritual. One is, Jesus says, Caesar, and the other is God. Now, when you think about it, the reality of our future is dependent on the reality of our present. Because it's the present that determines the future. In other words, what you are now, you are becoming. So what are you? Where really is your focus? Where really is, who controls my mind? Who controls my being? Who controls what I do on a day-to-day basis? Who controls it? I do. Really? Well, you have to have some plans for your future. But if he controls, then my hand is in his. And my future is secure. Because he will take care of me. He has been taking care of me. And look at me. I have no need to worry. I just give it in his hand. He will deal with it. All right, so, okay, that's nice to say. All right, that's nice to say. But you have to stop and think, really. Is this something you can say honestly from your heart? Honestly. Is this something you can, you can say it, right? But, honestly from your heart, can you really say it and know that, that's the truth inside? So notice then that we need some weapons. We need some weapons. And it's not going to be guns. You can't fight the government, I'm going to tell you. It won't happen. You can resist, good, resist. How long will it last? See, I'm fighting for my freedom. You have no freedom, you are dead. What freedom does a dead man have? You have no freedom. You're dead. So there's no need to fight, because you're going to lose anyway. I am so free that I don't fight for my freedom. It's already won. He fights my freedom. He gives me my freedom. I'm free in him. I'll share some more of that with you later. All right. So the weapons we need are really spiritual ones. That's what he says. In Colossians 1 and verse 3, I think we need to move up a little faster. In Colossians 3, in verse 1, it talks about, if you be risen with Christ. Have you read that verse before? It's a beautiful verse. If, and I think that's good. The start I like. If you be risen with Christ, then we are to do what, beloved? Seek those things which are where? Where Christ sitteth on the right hand of God. And that's what it says in verse 2. Why? Verse 3 says, for our lives are what now? Colossians 3:3. For our lives are what now? Hid with Christ where? It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Let's just go to verse 4. And then maybe verse 5. Well, let's stop at verse 4. It talks about for when Christ, who is our life. Now, what do you think? Think about what he's saying. He says, for when Christ, who is our life, shall appear where? Am I quoting that right? Verse 4. For when Christ, which is our life, shall appear where? In glory. Isn't that what it says? We shall also appear with him. I see, I'll go to the verse. I don't want to be doing something wrong. Did I say Colossians 3? And am I reading verse 4? For when Christ, who is our life, shall appear, then shall you also appear with him in glory. So the appearing here is in glory. When he appears in glory, we shall also appear in glory, right? Or when he appears in this glorious life, ours will be glorious too. That's interesting, because how it says that in John, 1 John 4:17, how that it says, for as he is, so are we. But is that true? Is that true? Honestly. John says, as he is, so are we in the world. Is that true? Are we just like God in the world? Are we like him? It's a good question. And maybe one that deserves an answer. So I'm just simply saying, when he's our life, we don't need to worry. When he's our life, it's taken care of. Because he's my life, I'll tell you this, I'm living forever. Because he's my life, this life never ends. My life never ends. It's everlasting. You know what that means? No end. So if as they say, you kill me, you don't kill me. You just put me to sleep. You just put me to rest. Because my life never ends. So when Christ comes back, he just calls his life to himself, and we all get up. Because we are part of his life. It's his life. That's my life, right? All right, so he says we are to seek the things which are above if we are risen with Christ. And what you're dealing with is really making our Heavenly Father the winner of this contest in our life. Because if we're honest, there's a contest every day. There's a struggle as who will really gain the supremacy and our worship and attention. Seek those things which are above. Render to God what belongs to Him. Present your body as a living sacrifice. I'm just trying to just do a little overview as to what we were thinking. And which will result in a new thinking or a transformation of mind. And then by putting on the whole armor of God, that will eventually cast down imaginations and everything that exalts itself against all that is called God or that is worship. Now, here's my question. Who is God in your life? A friend of mine wrote something to me once and shared with me how that it was really, she asked me, tell me what these blanks are. I'm going to read it for you and then ask you the same question. We'll answer the question and then we'll just close off. This was actually a real letter that was written to a man that was breaking up with his girlfriend. And so he wrote, he said, there is one thing about which I am in dead earnest, and that is the blank cause. Now that's what we're working on, what this is. It is my life, my business, my religion, my hobby, my sweetheart, my wife, my mistress, my bread and my meat. I work at it in the daytime. I dream of it at night. Its hold on me grows, not lessens, as time goes on. I shall be in it the rest of my life. When you think of me, it is necessary to think of the blank as well, because I am inseparably bound to it. Therefore, I can't carry on a friendship, a love affair, or even a conversation without relating to it this force which both drives and guides my life. I evaluate people, books, ideas, notions according to how they affect the blank cause and by their attitude towards it. I've already been in jail because of my ideas, and if necessary, I'm willing to go before a firing squad. I'm thinking, man, what's that blank? I couldn't even think of it. But you know what the answer was? Communism.
Communism.
All right. So, was it the principles of communism so appealing that somebody could write this? Honestly. And I'm thinking, I have something better. I'm thinking Christianity outweighs this by far. Could I have written this or anything close to this? Really? As my conviction about the Christian cause, about the cause of God? Could I have? Yet every day, every moment of every day, we are making decisions for God or against God. We're actually choosing different gods sometimes. Every day. So I want you to think for a moment. Just think. Stop. Take the time, because guess what? It's been good to listen to good sermons and we go home and you say, that guy, I like him. And nothing changes really. But it's not what is said. It's what reaches the heart. It's really what causes the experience with Him to grow and develop. That's why He says, if there are any virtue, think on these things. You've read that before? He's telling you, whatever you do, whatever you eat or drink, whatever, do all to His glory. And then He says, now, I want you to think about these things. And he's giving you a list of things. And He says, if there are any virtue, if there's any praise, think on these things. And that's what I want to leave with you. If from what we shared, you can glean something that will uplift your relationship with Him, that will bring you closer to Him. Even if it means sacrifice, even if it means tears, even if it means pain, as long as it leaves you in a place where you and Him are in harmony, then it would have been good for you to have been here. Thank you very much. Let's pray.